Emily Johnson, a successful restaurateur, faced subtle racism when visiting a restaurant she planned to buy. The waiter, unaware of her identity, belittled and ignored her. One surprising encounter changed everything, turning Emily from an unwelcome guest into the owner, where true hospitality finally prevailed. Emily Johnson entered the White Swan with an effortless grace that commanded attention. Her tall, slender figure was enhanced by a dark navy pantsuit tailored to perfection, paired with a white blouse adorned with a delicate lace collar. A small gold brooch, a keepsake from her mother, added a touch of warmth and personal significance to her otherwise refined appearance. Her long black curls, carefully styled, framed her face with elegance. Emily's eyes, dark and thoughtful, moved across the room, taking in the polished oak floor, the gleaming marble columns, and the tables dressed in crisp white tablecloths. The ambiance was that of a classic Parisian dining experience, where precision and elegance were the norms. Yet, beneath the veneer of luxury, Emily sensed a chill, a subtle air of exclusion that made itself known through the interactions of the staff and the practiced smiles of the patrons. It was an environment where only those deemed worthy were embraced. Eric, the young waiter, walked toward her with the polished demeanor of someone who had been well-trained. His sharp features and confident stride suggested a man accustomed to catering to an elite clientele. His eyes flicked over her, not so much greeting her as measuring her presence, deciding where she fit in the unspoken hierarchy of the room. A thin smile, devoid of warmth, appeared on his lips. "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite yet tinged with an undertone that only the perceptive would catch, a subtle question of her right to be there. Emily met his gaze without flinching. Her chin lifted slightly as she maintained a composed expression, revealing none of the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. Hidden under the table, her fingers curled into a light fist, a reflex honed over years of facing judgment and skepticism. She knew this look, knew it well. The subtle dismissal, the assumption of inferiority. But today wasn't the time for a confrontation. Today, she was here to observe, to experience, and to learn. With a calm smile that spoke of quiet strength, she responded, "I'll take a table near the window, please." Eric hesitated for the briefest moment, as if weighing her request, before nodding and gesturing with a practiced hand. Emily walked past him with a steady step, fully aware that the game had already begun, and she was prepared to play it on her terms. Eric, visibly irritated, gestured to the farthest table, positioned by a large window that allowed in a chilly draft. It was the table that staff referred to with a knowing look, the one reserved for patrons they hoped would leave quickly. The seat was isolated and unwelcoming, the sort that made one feel distinctly out of place. Emily, maintaining her composure, walked to the table without hesitation and settled into the cold, slightly creaking chair. Her eyes moved across the room, keenly observing the curious glances and muted whispers exchanged by other patrons. The subtle but pervasive message was clear. She was an outsider in a setting that prided itself on exclusivity. A moment later, Eric returned with the menu, dropping it with the barest effort, as if bestowing a favor. His impatience surfaced when he snapped, "Are you ready?" Barely a minute after leaving the menu. His tone was crisp, conveying that any delay was an unwelcome inconvenience. Emily met his gaze steadily, raising one eyebrow with a practiced calm. "I'll need a bit more time," she replied, her voice even and controlled. The waiter let out a theatrical sigh, turning away in a way that made sure she noticed his irritation, and moved on to greet another table with a warmth she hadn't yet experienced. Emily's gaze followed him as he approached an elderly couple nearby. His demeanor shifted. The strained politeness melted into a genuine, welcoming smile. He leaned in, suggesting a dish rarely offered, and spoke in a tone rich with enthusiasm. She watched as he poured their wine, discussing the notes and heritage of the vintage. the air around him transforming with effortless respect and attention. The contrast was sharp and undeniable. With a measured breath, Emily picked up the menu, feeling the tension in her fingers. This was familiar territory, a game as old as time, where prejudice disguised itself behind layers of courtesy and thinly veiled hypocrisy. Her mind flickered back to countless moments in her past when she'd been subtly dismissed, her worth underestimated simply because the people around her hadn't grasped who she truly was. But today, as the menu rested in her hands, she resolved that this encounter would not end like those before. This time, she was here to shift the narrative and reveal the truth that would upend expectations. The moment a well-known restaurant critic walked into The White Swan, the room instantly tensed. His presence was like a silent storm. No noise, no sudden outbursts, but everyone in the room became alert, including Eric. He immediately recognized the man. Tall, with streaks of gray in his hair, and a stern gaze that was either the harbinger of praise or disaster for any restaurant. Eric paled, realizing that every move he made would now be scrutinized. The critic surveyed the room and spotted Emily, walking directly toward her with a face that lit up with warmth at the sight of a familiar figure. "Emily, how wonderful to see you here," he said with genuine warmth and slight admiration. The restaurant became so quiet one could hear someone sigh in astonishment. Eric froze, his expression shifting from disdain to shock in an instant. "Thank you for noticing me," Emily replied with a smile, nodding to the critic. He continued, addressing everyone present. "I recently read her article on reviving classic restaurants. It was brilliant, and I've heard rumors that she's interested in acquiring a venue. I dare say we might see some changes around here." Eric felt his legs go weak. He suddenly understood who was in front of him, and every moment of his disdainful behavior flashed back in his memory, stabbing his conscience like a sharp needle. His face turned ghostly pale as he realized that the very guest he had snubbed was the famous restaurateur, and potentially the new owner of the establishment. Emily raised her eyes to Eric, her face lit by a slight but firm smile. "I suppose today I didn't receive the service I expected," she said softly, but with such confidence and control that her words felt less like a comment and more like a final verdict. The next day, as the sun began to illuminate the bustling city streets, the owner of the restaurant, Mr. Lawrence, heard about the previous night's events. He was an experienced restaurateur, familiar with every twist and turn of the business, and understood that a visit from someone as influential as Emily Johnson could either elevate his restaurant to new heights or ruin its reputation. He immediately dialed her number and, with a hint of guilt in his voice, apologized for the staff's behavior and invited her to a meeting. Emily, reserving her right to decide how to proceed, chose an in-person meeting in the restaurant's quiet setting. Lawrence, an older man with a kind yet weary face, nervously wrung his hands as he waited for her arrival. Soon, Emily walked in with the same calm confidence and sat across from him. Without wasting time, she stated her proposal clearly. She wanted to buy the restaurant to transform it into a place where every customer, regardless of background or status, felt welcomed. Lawrence, taken aback by her directness, quickly realized this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. He agreed, despite feeling some regret for not creating such an atmosphere himself over the years. Meanwhile, Eric, having learned about the events, was summoned to the owner's office. The entire way there, he was tormented by thoughts of the previous evening and how his actions might affect his career. In the room stood Lawrence, with a serious expression on his face. "Do you understand that your behavior yesterday was unacceptable?" His voice was cold and clear. Eric only nodded, clenching his fists in his pockets, and listened as he was informed of upcoming disciplinary actions and a review of his duties. Emily, who was present at the meeting, remained composed. She addressed Eric calmly but firmly. "Every person who walks through this restaurant's doors deserves respect. The culture of hospitality starts not with the menu, but with attitude. I hope you understand that and change your approach. Months passed. The White Swan reopened under Emily's management. The atmosphere transformed beyond recognition. Every guest, from regulars to first-timers, felt part of a warm, welcoming community. Eric, who continued to work there, had learned his lesson and changed. Now, he approached each guest with a genuine smile, understanding that true hospitality was not just a job, but the art of creating comfort and respect for all.